Hello, my name is Miss Kayla, the children's librarian at the Dubuque County Library, and welcome to Story Starters. Each week I read a couple chapters from a different children's book, so you can kind of get a sample of different books and see if you might be interested in reading the rest on your own. So the book I've got with me today is called Clan by Sigmund Brouwer. So I'm going to read the first few chapters. You can settle in at home and listen. Clan. Part 1. The Great Flood. Chapter 1. Atlattl's first warning of the saber-tooth was a snarl that echoed down the stone walls on each side of him. Atlatl whirled toward the sound of the snarl and froze at the sight of the horrible beast. Saber-tooth. It was the distance of the throw of a spear away. Atlatl did not have his spear. He'd set it against a tree just down the hill. At this distance, a spear would not have helped anyway. Since a childhood tumble down a cliff, Atlatl's left leg was permanently twisted at the knee, and he was unable to put weight on it to throw with any strength. The saber-tooth snarled again and took another step. Even if he was capable of running, which, because of his knee, he was not, Atlatl was trapped by the rock walls. This beast, then, was in no hurry. Saber-tooths were heavy and broad, low to the ground, shoulders wide and chest broad, haunches bulky with muscle. Saber-tooths did not chase with a burst of speed like a cheetah. Saber-tooths needed to pounce from ambush, then sink the spears of their front teeth into the necks of startled victims, or into the soft bellies of larger prey, like a mammoth or a camel. Its orange-brown fur rippled as it lifted and set down each of its massive paws. "I'm not worth your effort," Atlatl told the saber-tooth. He'd needed to swallow a few times just to work moisture into his throat. "I'm skinny. My bones will get stuck in your throat and choke you." It was either force himself to speak in a calm manner that hid his terror, or shriek and limp away as fast as possible. He really wanted to shriek and try to run. He knew, however, that movement would make the saber-tooth chase and pounce. Life, both as hunters and hunted, taught children the ways of survival early. Those who paid the price of inattention, if their bodies could be retrieved, were wrapped in animal skins and returned to the earth beneath the tears of the women of the clan, who would sing wordless tunes of mourning until the sun left the sky, their faces painted red with ochre. Stories of the person would be told around the fires so that no one would forget them. What Atlatl wanted to do most was listen to the tremble in his belly and flee, knowing that at any second those great claws could dig deep into the flesh of his shoulders and back. But he refused to allow himself to die with those marks. If his body was ever found, he did not want anyone in the clan to know he'd been a coward. Especially Taki, beautiful Taki. He wanted Taki to cry over his death, not be ashamed of him. After all, he was up in these hills hunting birds to bring her back his usual gift of bright feathers. "Go away," Atlatl told the saber-tooth. "I'm a healer. I can cast a spell on you. I will turn you into a mouse and squeeze you until your eyes pop out." It was an idle threat. Atlatl was not the clan's healer. That honor belonged to Banty, Atlatl's uncle. Atlatl was just a boy, almost a man, with a twisted left leg. "I saw a giant sloth," Atlatl said to the saber-tooth, "a little ways down the hill, much bigger than me. You can take your time. It will still be there. You do know that sloths move slowly, right? Yes?" The beast ignored Atlatl's promise of a giant sloth and continued to creep forward. Too soon, it would be close enough for a ferocious leap with terrifying jaws opened wide. Atlatl knew he'd been careless and doubted he'd survive to learn from his mistake. This was afternoon, late in the summer. Atlatl was near the edge of a high rock wall that overlooked the rounded grasslands and scattered clumps of trees of the Valley of the Turtle. It was a vast valley. The low set of mountains on the western side, purpled by haze, were at least a day's walk away. Far, far upstream along the river that fed this valley was Ghost Mountain, where the clan never traveled. Beyond Ghost Mountain was the land of the gods, where the turtle god had been bound by the others to save the people from his anger, not a place for mere mortals to tread. Atlatl had climbed this high into the hills because he wanted a private place to experiment with a new weapon for hunting birds. The idea had occurred to him the day before. Atlatl had been prodding clumps of grass with a long stick, hoping to force mice to scamper where he could swat them. A small snake had twisted towards him, climbing the stick. By instinct, Atlatl gave a flick of his wrist to fling the snake away, sending the snake end over end through the air so fast that, when it landed, the impact stunned it. Snake meat was a delicacy, so Atlatl ran the snake down before it could move. He raised his foot to smash the snake's head with his heel, but it came to life again. As he scraped the end of his stick along the ground, catching the snake mid-body and flung it harder than the first time, once again amazed at the distance he was able to throw it with the help of his stick. This time the snake landed and did not move. He had taken it back to camp to be skinned, but his mind had been on the power of the stick, not the delicious cooked snake. What if, he wondered, he could find a way to fling a stone in the same way, far enough to hit a bird at a distance. He was in the hills because he didn't want women and children watching and asking him questions in case his idea failed. While they welcomed all that he did to help the clan and never seemed to notice his limp, Atlatl wished he had 2 strong legs to allow him to join the hunters when they left camp. If he could arm himself with a weapon better than a spear, his father would have no choice but to welcome him on the next expedition. Perhaps, too, that same weapon would help him hunt for birds with bright feathers, and he could bring those feathers back for Taki. Alone then, up in the hills, Atlatl had spent the first few hours using a specially flaked rock, called a burin, to cut and scrape a stout branch he'd broken from a tree. The backside of the burin was a rounded half circle that fit perfectly into his palm. The upper end of it was a large notched piece that stuck out like a sharpened beak. By holding the burin snugly, he could push the beak along bone or antler or wood to carve with precision. Eventually, Atlatl had reduced the branch to the length of his arm. At the end of it, he left a short, forked branch. He sewed a small pouch of hide between the fork. This, too, took time. He learned sewing from his grandmother, Wawetseka, and he did not have her skills. The results, he felt, had been well worth his time and efforts. The pouch formed a small cup between the ends of the fork, secure enough to hold a rock. By using the stick as an extension of his right arm, he was able to fling the rock with force despite his twisted knee. Armed with a new weapon and a stone, Atlatl had gone looking for birds and other small prey. Before long, screeching from jays had drawn his attention. These distress signals were to warn other jays of a small predator. If he could get close enough, he'd be able to hunt the jays, and maybe even the small predator. His stealthy approach had taken him up and into the gorge that led to the edge of the valley wall, lined on both sides with broken ledges of sandstone. Bushes had found toeholds among those ledges, and they sprouted outward in tufts of various sizes. The jays hopped among them, squawking in fury at something among the leaves. Atlatl had been unable to see what was making the leaves quiver with movement. He crept closer and closer, ready to fling his stone, until he heard the snarl of the saber-tooth. Now, as it approached in a low slink, Atlatl realized he should not have allowed himself to get distracted by his own hunt. He should have been on the lookout for the danger that came in a land filled with predators like dire wolf and lion and cheetah and short-faced bear and saber-tooth, animals that would also be drawn by the distress calls of the jays. This realization did him little good, because it was too late, far too late. Chapter 2. The approaching saber-tooth was just as absorbed in its hunt as Atlatl had been absorbed in hunting the jays. Ooh la la, Atlatl began to sing. Perhaps a strange sound would confuse the beast. Everyone in the clan agreed that when Atlatl sang, it was indeed a strange sound. Ooh la la, ooh la 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 la. The saber-tooth swung its head from side to side as it tested the breeze that wafted over Atlatl's shoulder towards the beast. The distance between prey and hunter was closing. Let me warn you, Atlatl said. I am armed with a stone thrower that will make you regret this. The saber-tooth ignored his warning. You give me no choice. Atlatl flung the stone from his stick. It thumped against the saber-tooth's shoulder, but served only as a distraction, as if a large fly had buzzed into it. That might have killed the jay, Atlatl thought with a trace of satisfaction. And then he told himself that this was not the time to take pride that his idea for a new weapon was a good one. Not against a saber-tooth, or direwolf, or short-faced bear, or lion. He was going to die with this useless weapon in his hands. Atlatl backed up a few steps, bumping into rock wall, with the screeching jays and bush directly above him. The saber-tooth advanced. Atlatl had no choice but to take a stance and try to defend himself with the pointed fork at the end of his stick. This is your last chance, Atlatl said. Stop now, or die at my hands. With his right hand, he placed the butt of the throwing stick against the rock face behind him, holding the fork upward. When the saber-tooth leaped, he'd shove the top of the stick downward to make it horizontal, and step aside at the last second while holding the stick in place against the rock, hoping the beast would impale itself on the makeshift spear. The odds weren't great, but it was worth a try. Atlatl readied himself. He felt the thumping in his chest. Would this be his last day? Would his body be found so his grandmother, Wawet Seka, and the rest of the clan would wear red ochre in his honor and tell stories about him at the campfire to keep the memory of him alive? He smelled sweet blossoms, heard the buzz of bees, felt the warmth of the sun on his arms and shoulders. He wondered why he had never appreciated how good it felt to be alive until this moment. If this was going to be his final breath, he decided he would think of Taki and how she sang at the campfires and how the flames reflected in her eyes. Did it matter now that Powwow boasted to all the other hunters that he would one day try to claim Taki? If Atlatl dreamed of Taki in his dying moments, then maybe he could fool himself into believing she sang songs for him. Then, without warning, a saber-tooth cub scampered down the ledge between Atlatl's legs and darted straight towards the saber-tooth. It was then that Atlatl noticed the saber-tooth's swollen milk glands and realized this was a mother with a cub so small it still suckled. He also realized that all this time The jays had been screeching at the cub. Behind the saber-tooth was a small cave in the hillside that Atlatl had not noticed. The saber-tooth's lair. The cub tripped and tumbled and bawled for help, rolling into the massive paws of its mother. The saber-tooth lowered her head and picked up the cub by the nape of its neck. She turned towards the lair. Atlatl felt his ribs begin to move again as he drew in air. The saber-tooth had no interest in him, for now. But just as he took his breath of relief, two dire wolves appeared, upwind of the saber-tooth, stealthy shadows detaching themselves from a small stand of trees between the saber-tooth and her lair. They too had been drawn by the distress calls of the jays. The mother saber-tooth set the cub down between her front legs and snarled at the dire wolves. 4 more wolves crept out from the trees and formed a semicircle around Atlatl and the saber-tooth with her cub. Chapter 3. Dire wolves, dark fur, yellow eyes, jaws powerful enough to crush the bones of their victims. With the intelligence of pack animals accustomed to detaching young mammoths from herds, that intelligence was evident now. The saber-tooth was a far larger animal than any of the dire wolves alone. She was broader in the chest, higher in the shoulders, so not one wolf committed itself to a frontal attack. Instead, they pinched in from all angles, moving together with the same creeping pace. The cub gave a high-pitched scream of rage, and the mother roared. The wolves crept closer, forcing saber-tooth and cub back to the ledge, so close that Atlatl smelled the musk of their fur. One wolf darted in from the side, drawing the mother saber-tooth in that direction. As it did, another from the other side pounced on the cub, managing to grab a front leg to drag it away. The cub howled in rage and swiped the wolf across the snout with its other front paw, raking lines of blood. The wolf dropped the cub and retreated. The cub dragged itself back to the mother on 3 legs, finding safety between her large paws. Now the mother backed into Atlatl's legs, pressing him against the rock wall behind him. He could see the hackles of her neck and even the dust rising from her fur. Had he wanted, he could have placed his hand on the giant cat's back. A wolf made a quick dash. The big cat snapped her head in its direction. Another wolf pounced at the same time from the other side, and the saber-tooth slapped it with a giant paw. Blood gushed from the wolf's shoulder. It rolled backward at the blow and came up growling. The wolves backed away slightly, and the mother used a paw to nudge the cub backward, almost to Atlatl's feet. The cub was not his to protect, but Atlatl reacted without thinking and scooped the tiny cub upward with his right hand. He glanced over his shoulder and saw an outcrop of the ledge above him. He lifted the cub to the ledge, where it bared its teeth at the wolves below. Strangely, pressed between the saber-tooth and the rock behind, Atlatl felt safe. The big cat wouldn't turn on him, while the wolves had her surrounded, and the wolves couldn't reach him, while the big cat was a protective shield of teeth and claws. But this safety would only last as long as the saber-tooth was alive. His instincts told him that now was the time to climb. He glanced over his shoulder again. He took valuable time to measure footholds and the breaks in the rock wall where he could find places for his hands to pull his body upward. He was grateful the wall tilted slightly away from him, making the ascent easier. Another glance at the wolves. 2 were moving in from one side, 3 from another. Any hesitation now would cost Atlatl his life. Atlatl whirled away from the fight. He left his throwing stick behind. He reached high with his right hand, pulled upward, and found another place to grip with his left hand. He found cracks to wedge his feet into, and, leaning into the rock face, pushed up with his good leg and grabbed another spot higher up with his right hand. He took 2 more upward steps, relying on the strength of his upper body to compensate for his weak leg. His face reached the level of the cub. Atlatl saw that the cub's leg mangled by the dire wolf was bleeding where the fur was torn. He looked up, and for a moment their eyes locked, and then the cub slashed out with the undamaged front leg, and tiny claws ripped across Atlatl's nose. This ingratitude was so outrageous, Atlatl should have flicked the cub off the ledge and sent it to its certain death among the wolves. But instead he grunted pain mixed with laughter at the cub's feistiness. He felt blood run down his face as he lifted himself onto the ledge beside the cub. It kept snarling and hissing. Atlatl knew he should just leave the cub to its fate. But the cub had saved Atlatl's life by returning to the mother from the bush. Despite the pain he felt from the slash across his nose, Atlatl also found the cub's useless bravery to be amusing. "If you try that again, I will pull your entrails out through your hind end," Atlatl warned the cub. The cub briefly stood on its two back legs and swiped a front paw at him. "Enough from you," Atlatl said. Atlatl waved his left hand as a distraction and again scooped the cub by the belly with his right hand. He lifted it above his head and set it on a higher ledge. Now it was truly out of reach of the dire wolves. "Stay out of my way," Atlatl warned, or he let a new threat die in his throat. The cub was doomed to die. The weak survived only if they had help. This was something Atlatl's cousin, Powwow, would whisper to Atlatl over the years. "You are weak. You are a burden. You only take from the clan." If their grandmother knew of this, she would be furious. The clan always taught that kinship mattered most, that the clan survived in different landscapes because everyone contributed according to their strengths, and that all had strengths. Atlatl wanted to take heart from his grandmother's compassion, but while his father, Nutau, never spoke of Powwow's threat, taunts, Atlatl always sensed his father's disappointment that Atlatl would never be able to match Powwow's strength. The cub retreated into a bush. "So you can listen," Atlatl told the cub. Atlatl pulled himself a little higher until the cub was below his feet, peering out from the bush, still hissing and spitting at the wolves below. The wolves had found their rhythm, darting in and out. None inflicted fatal wounds on the saber-tooth, but each slash of teeth drew more blood from the big cat's shoulders and ribs. He could see the saber-tooth tire as it lost blood. Each counterattack came slower, and each snap of the head to protect itself was less certain. Atlatl winced. It could have been him down there, about to be torn apart. He found a large rock and pulled it free. He flung it downward, and it smashed into the head of one of the wolves as it moved in on the saber-tooth. Stunned, the wolf fell briefly. The big cat lunged, sinking the twin spears of its teeth into the wolf's belly. The wolf howled. The saber-tooth pulled away. Atlatl felt triumph for the big cat. The feeling didn't last long. She was clearly tiring quickly. The battle continued until, as if by command, the other wolves sprang all at once and buried the saber-tooth beneath a flurry of savage bites and growls. The end was inevitable for the saber-tooth, and Atlatl knew that once the wolves were finished with her, they might start looking for the prey that got away. With the snarling and roars of the fight below him, Atlatl focused on saving himself. He was about to pull himself up a little farther when the cub leaned forward, as if ready to join the battle below. "Should I just throw you to the wolves?" Atlatl asked the cub. Your death will be much easier than waiting among these rocks to starve once the wolves are gone. The cub cocked its head and stared at Atlatl. No, he said to the cub, you are not part of the clan. The cub moved closer. I'm telling you, you're on your own. You can't come with me. As Atlatl watched, the cub nearly tipped off the ledge as his big clumsy paws scrambled for purchase. Without thinking, Atlatl reached out to steady it. His cub had saved his life after all. Because it was late summer, aside from the hide moccasins on his feet, Atlatl wore only leggings and a vest of scraped and cured animal skin, and his toolkit, a leather pouch with a long strap to hold it over his shoulders and against his back. Setting his toolkit aside, Atlatl pulled his vest up and over his head. He pulled the strap of his toolkit back onto his bare shoulders and wrapped the cub in his vest. It fought briefly while its head was exposed, but as soon as Atlatl wrapped the vest around the cub's head and blinded it, it grew still. Now at least it wouldn't slash at Atlatl. With the vest under his arm, Atlatl climbed slowly and carefully. He didn't want to risk a misstep that would send him tumbling back down. Atlatl didn't turn until he was 3/4 the way up the ledge. By then, the wolves were tearing into the mother saber-tooth, where she lay motionless on the ground below. Atlatl crawled the last short distance up and out of the gorge and began to limp down the hills to the safety of the tents and fires of the clan. I'm going to stop there. That was the first 3 chapters of Clan by Sigmund Brouwer. If you'd like to find out what happens in the story, you can check it out here at the Dubuque County Library District. Thank you so much for joining me today. Bye.